That show was crazy. And we went past our time, like 11. They actually shut the power off. They turned off all the amps. And so it was just me playing drums. Like, haha, you can't turn me off. And we just kept playing the rest of the song with just drums and the whole room singing. And it was just incredible.
Imagine growing up in upstate New York, and one day you're in the car with your family, the radio's on, and all of a sudden you hear a song that transforms you into another state of being. A song that's mesmerizing. In fact, it's a song by the Talking Heads. And my guest on the podcast today, Chris Cardinal, this experience happened to him. He was listening to a song one day on the radio, and it just changed him forever. He ended up joining several bands. He toured the United States, he toured Europe, and he had many life-changing experiences that he's going to share here today with us. I want to thank Chris for being on the podcast today because these stories are, I mean, they're amazing. They're really, it's really great to hear about how the music scene was back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And it's an insight into another world. Today we have smartphones, we have access to constant communication. Back then, when they were touring all over, they had to rely on each other as a band. They had to rely on maps, I mean, to drive on the road. And like, imagine that today. You trust your GPS, you trust your phone, you look down at it, and that's really the guide today. But back then, it was more of an analog experience. It was more organic. And Chris today is going to tell us about these experiences and how they changed his life and where he is now. So I, again, want to thank Chris for being on the podcast today. A lot of very amazing stories, and I know you'll enjoy them too. So thanks for listening and enjoy. Hey, Chris, how you doing today?
Good, good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm honored that you asked me to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to start off by just asking you a very basic question. Where are you originally from?
Well, I was born in Niskayuna, New York. Not really sure exactly how to spell it, but it's up by Albany. But moved to Walk in, I think I was 2, and then grew up in Maybrook, pretty much from 4 to 19, and then moved to Middletown. I've been in Middletown ever since.
Cool,
But
cool.
most of my years, I claim Maybrook. That's where I'm from.
Nice. Hometown. For sure. So obviously, one of the big features of your life is drumming and music. I wanted to ask you, what are some of your earliest musical memories?
Wow. Um, well, as a kid, before even playing drums, I'd say my parents were into classic rock, WPDH all the way, Tom Petty, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, AC/DC. My brother was a little bit more of a metalhead, Metallica, Iron Maiden. So I kind of got a mix of all that. And I remember sitting in the car and very specifically, Talking Heads were on, and the drums in it are kind of inspiring to me. And I always remember like air drumming, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, but it was Talking Heads was really the first thing that kind of kicked it off. Burning down the house. Do 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 do. And it was that. I had friends that got guitars for their birthday or Christmas, and I didn't have a drum set. I was probably 7 or 8, and I literally set up some pans, like the crayon tins. Like once your Crayola box falls apart, you just throw them in like a little tin. So I had a couple tins of Crayola crayons, and that was like my drum set. I don't know where I had sticks. I thought I was a ninja as a kid, so I used to like throw them into the ground. So they were all like muddy and dirty, but I would bang on tins as they would strum guitars that were not tuned and they didn't know what they were doing either. But that was the beginning. Uh, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And so was it that experience of listening to Talking Heads that really inspired you as a kid to want to drum? Like what was the initial inspiration? And do you have any family that's musical? Because I know that could be a strong influence on
Oh
some.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. My father was a guitar player and bass player. My brother played guitar. So it was always in the house. It was always around. My father, it was actually, so I got my first drum set from, I think I went away to summer camp, like upstate. I was 9 years old, and my parents dropped me off for a week, like never being away from home alone, to a summer camp, like way upstate. Where was it? Camp Nazareth is what it was called. And my birthday's in August, so they picked me up. And driving home was probably like a 4 hour ride. Back home, we stopped in, so I don't even know where it was, some music store, and picked up a used drum set to surprise me driving home. And that was the beginning. I was 9. I had just had my 9th birthday, so it was kind of like a birthday present, but that's when I got it. And then my father decided to finish our basement and make it like a recording studio. And he put, I mean, every day when he got out of work, he was in the basement insulating and putting up sheetrock and using like drop ceiling tiles. He like glued them to the walls and to everything to soundproof our basement, which didn't work. It wasn't soundproof, but it looked really cool. So when you're down there, it felt like you're in a studio. And he had all the amps and guitars and a PA system and a little 4-track recorder, everything we needed. And then my drum set had a spot. Before that, I was just playing in the living room. But that's kind of how it started. But my father always played, and it was really like the WPDH, just AC/DC, and just growing up listening to classic rock and seeing my father play and my brother play. For some reason, I never picked up a guitar at that time. I mean, I did, and I fooled around, but it was the Talking Heads that made me want to be the drummer, not the guitar player. Um, that's kind of how it started.
Cool. All right. And you said earlier that you used to have your friends come over and you'd play music in the basement, you'd play drums, and your other friends they'd come over and they'd play their instruments. Do you remember like what your first band was? Like
Definitely.
okay.
Um, it was called Collision. It was Jaron Sanford, Kevin Akers, and Dan Pasilius played bass. The other two played guitar, and I was the drummer. And we were horrible, but it was exactly what our bond was, exactly what a band was supposed to be. And we were just learning instruments. I remember we would be jamming and making stuff up, and my brother or my dad would come down and be like, "You need to tune those guitars. That sounds horrible." And we're like, we don't need to tune. That's for smart people. We're just gonna play. We're real rock stars." So many times my dad would come down, stop us, and tune the guitars so we could go play again. But in Maybrook, there was the Maybrook Flea Market, which was like Maybrook's claim to fame, and which my father actually had a shop there when I was a kid and sold candy. But I went down there. There was an airbrush place where they make custom T-shirts. So I had Collision T-shirts made, and like I was doing merch, at like 12, 13. Although I think I only made four of them for the four of us. I have no idea how I afforded that. I probably got my parents to give me money for it and explained how awesome it would be, and we needed to have band shirts. I really wish I had one of those now, but they
How
hung
old
around for
how old are you guys at the time?
probably 12,
Oh wow, okay.
maybe younger. Yeah, 11, 12.
Did you guys ever end up playing live, or was it mainly just for fun?
No, we never made it that far. We were strictly a basement band. But Dan didn't really follow up in music. He kind of did his own thing. Um, Jaron, he his mother ended up passing away from cancer, and his father moved him to Indiana to be closer to other family. And in Indiana, he got into music and he became a musician and played in several bands, and he's toured all over, and he's done his own thing and like legitimate. It's really cool. Kevin, he actually got an internship with K104, which was so weird because he was kind of metal. He was into Slayer. His favorite band was The Doors. He was like long hair. And then he goes and gets a job at K104. And he was there for a while as like a radio personality. And he became a producer and worked his way up and was like the morning show producer. He worked with Woodman. He was like the guy that would go out and do like the haunted house stuff. And like he'd be like the doofy intern that they'd send out, and he'd be like, "Oh my god, we're freaking out!" Yeah, that's what he did. But he stuck with radio and got into radio advertising and producing shows, and now he has his own business where he creates commercials, radio spots, voiceovers, and he's doing lots of radio work from his closet in his room. And he lives in Florida and just records radio spots for people all over the country. He actually did more for me for real estate.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think we were talking about him in the past. That's right. Cool. So obviously all your fellow bandmates, they ended up going their separate ways, doing their own thing. But when you were growing up and you were in this band, Collision, were you thinking when you were an adult you were going to be a professional musician, or like what was your future aspiration? Like what did you want to be when you grew up at that point? I mean, you were 12 years old, you were young, so obviously the world was ahead of you. There was a lot
Yeah.
of possibilities open. So what did you want to be at that point in time?
I was definitely going to be a professional drummer. At that point, there was no doubt. And obviously, there were other bands. Like I played with them, and as we grew up, not that we grew apart, but our musical interests grew in different ways. So I kind of got more into like a progressive metal type of thing where one would get into grunge and the other one got into more hardcore and heavy stuff. Um, we each had our own bands. So we started together and then we built our own group of people around us that played the kind of music we were into. So I had another band. I was probably 14, 14, 15. And we were playing more like Dream Theater, progressive metal. I don't want to say more skilled stuff, but more technical, nerdy musician type of music. Um, and I remember telling my guitar player Charlie at the time, like we created like a 5-year plan for ourselves that we were going to make it in 5 years, and we were like 15. He was a little older than me, but I was probably 15. Did it work out? I guess it depends on what your definition is. But oddly enough, Kevin was in a hardcore band that he started called Inner Dam, and I was in this progressive metal band called Eye to Eye, and we lived like across the street from each other. So when our band practice was over, like we'd go over to his house and watch his band play, and we'd kind of like make fun of them because they're like jun, 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 jun. It was just to us, it was very basic because we're like screaming guitar solos and doing odd time stuff. Um, and I would say, looking back, it was foolish of me to do that. But when you're young and you see something as less than what you're doing, you don't give it the credit it deserves. I'm definitely much more mature of a musician now, and I don't focus on the skill as much as I do the songwriting. Um, but either way, Inner Dam later on, they had some band changes and or member changes, I'd say, and Kevin wasn't in the band anymore. And I got a call because they would come over to our band practice too, and then make fun of us for doing guitar solos. So it was this mutual respect, but we busted on each other all the time. And so I got a call one day from the singer from Inner Dam, which I had met from band practice, but we didn't really know each other well. And he said, "Listen, we lost our drummer, but we have studio time booked. Can you learn a song and just record it for us? I know you're capable of it, and it's not really your thing, but could you do us a favor because we don't want to. It's for a compilation, and we don't want to miss out on this opportunity." I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So now Inner Dam's practicing in my house, in my basement, and I'm playing and learning the song. So we go to the studio, record the song, and at the studio, they were like, "Well, we know that it's not really your thing, but we actually have a show that's coming up too. Are you interested in playing that show with us?" And I'm like, "Oh, now I got to learn a bunch more songs." And I'm like, "Sure, whatever, it's cool. I mean, at least I'm playing out." I played out once in Randolph, New Jersey, to like 17 people, half of which were family and friends, and the other half was sitting at the bar and didn't even know we were there. So, I mean, it was really cool playing out. And I knew that this band, although it's like hardcore and more underground, they played a lot. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I know I can learn the songs. Not to be cocky, but I'm like, I know it's within my ability. I can do this. Let me learn 7 or 8 songs so we can go play. Um, so I learned the songs and we're practicing, and I'm kind of getting into it. Like it's cool. I'm adding like a little extra flair and my own style to it. But I don't know. Maybe it was probably about 2 weeks before the show we were supposed to play. There was another show that was coming up that was a band called Earth Crisis and One King Down. I don't know who else was playing, but those were two of the bands that I remember. And they were like, "Hey, you want to go to the show and check it out? You've never actually been to one of these shows." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Like I'm kind of like in a band. Let's go as a band. And I remember going to the show. It was in Newburgh at the Avalon, and One King Down was playing, and their intro just starts with like this noisy feedback, and I had like this experience that just changed me. And to see the amount of energy that this band put out and created for everyone in the room. I mean, it was the first time I saw like mosh pits in person and people dancing and going, I don't want to curse in your video, going crazy, like ape shit, like bodies just flying all over, jumping off stage. And the band, which kind of in the metal side of music, like they discourage people from coming on stage. Like it's just a different environment. And people mix up hardcore and metal all the time. They think it's the same thing. Culturally, completely different. Yes, there's distortion. Sometimes they're screaming in both, but it's a completely different thing. So I'm used to like the metal where There's a bunch of drunk people, and if you go on the stage, then a bouncer is going to push you off the stage. You're going to be in trouble. It's not wanted. So I'm at this hardcore show, and One King Down's playing. And first of all, they're straight edge. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they promote like animal rights, a lot of their stuff. Yes, they're screaming, but they're angry about stuff that you should be angry about. And it was just different. Like to see people not drinking and this angry and metal. And then people would get on the stage and the singer would like pull them over and sing with them. And then he'd dive off the stage and the singer would dive off the stage and people would catch him and pick him up and put him back. And I'm like, what is this madness? This is crazy. And it's amazing. I got so hyped at that show. I couldn't wait to play. And I'm like, we have 2 weeks to go. Like, I want to play now. Like, can we get up there? And I'm like, 2 weeks. Like, all right. So now after the show, like I was all in. Like, this is what I wanted to do. This is where it was going to happen.
So was that show, was that kind of like another moment in a way, like in the past when you were in the car and you remember hearing the talking heads and hearing the drums and being mesmerized by that? Do you feel like the show that you went to, do you think that that was another experience that really energized you and kind of put you on the track that you wanted to be on, really inspired you?
Definitely. Because it changed the way I thought about music and musicians and bands, like kind of all together. Because before that, a lot was the people I hung out with, the metalheads and the really technical people that are talking about arpeggios and playing solos and what time signature is that in. None of that mattered. Like they played in basic 4/4, but they played with so much energy, and the changes were great. There's build-ups and stops, and there's so much dynamics, and the way that the music was written, and it would build tension, and then it would release that tension and like explode, and it did something emotionally where the metal stuff I was listening to, like it didn't really do that. There was stuff I liked and I'd really kind of like get into and like listening to, but very rarely did it give me like an emotional thing. And it was the first time I was able to see music that, although I'm not going to say One King Down can't play their instruments, they're actually really good musicians, but they didn't play to their maximum ability. They played for the song. And that's when I learned that that's more important. You don't have to do everything you can do. You just do what's needed. And sometimes you'll need to use more skill than other times, but playing for the song is what's most important. And creating these emotional sways. So definitely going to that show. I mean, I remember that show more than I remember my first show that I played in, which I think was also there at the Avalon. But no, I remember that definitely.
So what was, I know you said you remember that show more than the first show that you played, but what was it like going back a little bit when you first played on stage? I know you said there was mainly family and there was some people at the bar or whatever, but
Yeah.
how was it like? Were you nervous? Like what was that experience like?
Yeah, I was a little nervous, but I think we rehearsed so much that I wasn't too concerned with playing. It was just the nerves of playing in front of people. I knew we were good enough and we practiced enough that everyone knew what they had to do and it wasn't going to be a problem. It was more about like ultimate metal, like drum sets generally are bigger. So my first show I ever played, I wanted to use my drum set. I don't even remember if they offered a back line. Like it was when they have equipment there that you could use. I don't even know if they had that, but like I was playing my set. There's no way I was going to use another one. So I had, Jesus, I don't know, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven toms, double bass, all my cymbals. Like I just had a huge set and I brought it all with me. This was the first time I ever had to do that, but it was a pain in the ass. And no, I really remember just it almost felt like a practice because my friends were there that would come see us at practice, and it was those lights in your face, so you can't really see much beyond right in front of the stage. So it kind of just like zoned out and just played like I was in my basement and just played the songs, and that was it. So it was very cool. I think I was 16. Uh, yeah, I was 16 when I played my first show. Um, and that was with I. And then I think I was probably either 16 or 17 by the time I was playing with Inner Dam. Wasn't long after.
So how did that first show that you did compare with Inner Damned? So obviously two totally different experiences. Obviously the first one you said family, people at the bar, kind of not really paying attention totally. Now, what was it like when you're with Inner Damned? You've experienced the show that you've said was pretty much life changing, and then like, how do you channel that? Well, what was that experience like?
Um, it was that very similar energy, but I was on the other side of it. And creating that energy for other people is amazing. Especially, I mean, I never played on stage as a guitar player, but as a drummer, there's a lot of responsibility, and that energy can be created by how hard I play. And I played pretty hard. But Inner Dam was pretty well known locally. So it wasn't like it wasn't Inner Dam's first show. It was my first show with them. So they were already established. They had a fan base. And in hardcore, it's some of the thing is also different. Like there's a built-in crowd, these hardcore kids that they stick together and they support each other and they go to every show. So and there's a bunch of bands playing. Um, I don't even remember who played with us that night, but there's there were probably like 7 bands, which seems like a ridiculous amount. But they start the first couple bands play half an hour. A lot of them share equipment, so there's not much time in between. By the time you get to the end, I mean, it's like 11 o'clock midnight and the band's starting. But I remember the energy, and there's been so many shows, but just being a part of making those people dance like that and jump all over the stage, and to see 20, 30 kids piling on top of each other because your singer's holding the microphone out and they want to scream the lyrics and then back off for a breakdown and just swing their arms and go nuts. Like you're making that. And it's just such a cool experience to be on that side.
Yeah, that's, I mean, just the way you described it sounds awesome. So how is the music scene in the Hudson Valley around that time? What is it? I'm assuming this is the late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, late
Right.
90s, 97 to yeah, it was like 97ish when I got into it. I mean, when you said music scene, I don't know about all of it because really I was only part of the hardcore scene, which is its own little underground pocket. Um, I didn't go to clubs to honestly to see other bands. Sometimes I went to see other hardcore bands, but usually I was playing, so didn't leave much opportunity. But the nights that you played, you're usually playing with 5, 6 other bands. So I would see them, and we'd play in New Jersey and Connecticut and Newburgh and Middletown, Long Island, and we'd go all over, and we'd end up playing with the same bands that we played with before. Uh, so I got to know a lot of them personally, and and musically. One of my biggest kind of influences, and was a local band, was a band called Drowning Room. And their drummer, Shane Chakelis, he graduated from Wallkill High School, and he is technically an amazing drummer. I mean, his writing skills are great too. I don't want to point out one thing good to make it seem like he's bad somewhere else. He's just an amazing drummer. And when I got into it, this kind of goes back a little bit. I'm pretty sure they played that first night. They definitely played that same show with One King Down that I saw. And watching Shane play, he was into Dream Theater and progressive metal and the super technical stuff that I listened to. So, like, I met him and we started talking drums and like nerd drum talking. And I remember him saying to me, like, dude, join the band. Like, you and me, like, we'll play in this area. Like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're into that kind of music. Like, you can like it all. And like, come do this. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. So Shane was a big influence. And actually, there were some shows for Inner Dam that I couldn't play, and Shane filled in. So I mean, I'll admit he's better than me. He could play everything I did. But it's funny, we never hung outside of music. We never hung out. Like, we never called. I mean, there were no cell phones back then. Nobody texted anyway. But we saw each other at shows a lot. And I got to know his father, and like, we'd help each other set up on stage and break stuff down, which kind of everyone did anyway. Like, that's one cool thing about the hardcore scene is your fans are your friends, and the other bands are your friends because you're all part of the same scene. Everybody looks out for each other. So it's really cool when you finish a set and you're exhausted and you have blisters on your hands and like all you want to do is drink some water and breathe. And like 12 people come over and they grab your drum set and they take it outside for you. And you're like, damn. Like, I carry my seat out because I was sitting in it. They couldn't get that. And everybody just does it. Like, no one asks, like, oh, you need help with this. Like, it's just a really cool environment. But anyway, Shane was one of my big influences. He's an amazing drummer. And that kind of got me comfortable with converting over into like the hardcore scene. And then I got into a bunch of bands and it didn't matter anymore. But One King Down is still one of my favorites.
Cool. That's awesome. So sounds like you're doing a lot of touring at this time. You're doing a lot of practicing, and you're still pretty young at this point in the 90s. How are you balancing everything? Like were you like still in school? Were you working? Like how did you manage it all?
Well, yeah, I was doing all of it. I worked at Blue Beacon Truck Wash from 4 to 12 at night. And it wasn't all through high school, but yeah, in 97, I was, I don't know, 10th grade, 10th. I graduated in 99. So somewhere in there. And honestly, I was in a Boy Scout marching band in Maybrook, which Troop 236, Maybrook Boy Scout troop. But so I was doing parades. I was working at night. I played football in the fall. So I would have school to football practice to working at night. And the nights that I wasn't working, we'd have practice. And then on the weekends, we'd go out and play. So it was pretty steady, just go all the time. There were a couple shows, and one in particular that we were supposed to play at the Chance with Earth Crisis, which is a big hardcore band. And I had a football game that night. And it seems so weird because that's my other thing. Like for a while I was just going to be a drummer, and then through high school I was going to be either a drummer or a football player. So I had a backup plan. Fast forward, I don't really do either professionally, but so it was the game right after like the interim reports came out, and you had to be passing. Actually, it might have been the first report card. It might have been the first report card. And if you weren't passing, you got dropped from the football team and you couldn't play until you got your grades up. So I I made it. I was fine. Barely, but a friend of mine who was the captain, we were both captains on the team. So he was a captain, and I guess he was failing in class and he couldn't play the game. But this was the same night that I'm supposed to play a show with the Chance. And I told him, like, listen, I got a football game. I can't do it. I remember my singer being annoyed with me, like, really? Like, we're playing with Earth Crisis and you got a football game? It's just how I am. Like, it's my team. I know you're my band, but it's it is what it is. So they got Shane to fill in for drums, and my friend that couldn't play in the football game went to the show instead of coming to the game to watch us play. That was kind of funny. Which there's pictures from the show that made it into like CD, like our little picture covers, and it's funny because the singer's holding the mic out, and you see Ryan singing when he was supposed to be at the football game with me. I wasn't even playing drums; Shane was. So that was a weird night, but yeah, balance has always been a little difficult. Even now, it's probably the biggest challenge in life as you get older, especially when you have kids.
So eventually you graduate high school, I think you said in 99.
Yeah.
After that, when did you decide to start touring as like a professional point?
Well, so Interdam was signed to a record label in Belgium called Released Power Productions, and um, it was a small label. It was one guy and his wife. Out of their apartment, they ran this record label. There wasn't much to do. I was about distribution and just making deals with people of who pays for recording, pressing CDs. At that time, CDs were kind of the way to go. It's so weird that they're almost irrelevant now. But so around the time, like that spring before graduation, we were offered by the record company to do a tour in Europe, which just like blew my mind. Like that's crazy. Like we didn't even tour the United States. I mean, we played around the Northeast a lot, even up in Canada, but to do like a European tour just didn't feel like we were at that level. So we went for it. And the deal was essentially the record label was going to set up the tour for us, pay for a bus and a driver. The bus is actually a van. Nothing we have here. It's like this weird kind of commercial big top van, like almost like those Mercedes ones that you see, like those weird van truck things. And that was pretty much it. The rest was I think also they were going to rent a drum set, so I didn't have to bring a drum set there. But besides that, oh, and amps. So we just brought guitars, drumsticks, um, and merchandise. That's all we really had to take, but we had to pay for our plane tickets. That was what we had to do. And I remember it was $480 a person, round trip. And I just graduated high school and I didn't have any money. So my guitar player, Mike, had a friend who had a brother who had a construction company, and he needed somebody to work for the summer. He knew the situation, like, I'm going on tour, I just need to make some money. So I got hired, and that whole summer we were supposed to go in, it was like the end of October. Um, yeah, I want to say like the 26th or 27th. So I had from graduation to October to earn the money for my ticket. So I worked, and coincidentally, it was Mike was the same one that I worked at Volkswagen with when I met your father. So it's funny how it all ties together. But so Mike was the guitar player in Interdam, and we saved up money, got all our stuff together, and in surreal fashion, drove to the airport to fly to Amsterdam, Holland for a European tour. And it was just so weird. But that was it. It wasn't like I decided one day, like, that's it, we're gonna be a touring band and get rich. The hardcore scene is not, that's one thing that's different with like metal and other music. There's a lot more money for the bands, I think. I never got rich either way, so I can't really guarantee that. But what I was familiar with was playing hardcore shows where you spend $50 on gas to drive to Maine to make $20 for the night and then drive home. Like, you got paid in emotion. um, but that was kind of the scene. It was, I don't really even know if it's different now. So I'm not really in a hardcore band to know how that works money wise, but we played a lot of shows for free and a lot of shows for some money to contribute to gas. And now we're going to Europe, and it was amazing. So we get into Amsterdam, Holland, and we're supposed to meet up with I can't remember his name. Anyway, there was one guy that was supposed to, we got a uh, he picked us up at the airport, and we get back to his apartment, and he's like, so you guys need to take a nap, you need to take a rest. We just had an 8 hour flight, 7 hour flight. And we're like, no way. Like, we can put our stuff down and let's go see the town. Like, I've never been to Europe. This is so cool. And I remember just walking down the sidewalk, and it's like, everyone knows Amsterdam is known for like prostitutes and legal drugs. And what people don't see is a really old city that has cobblestone roads and sidewalks and just the buildings and architecture. It's an amazing place to just see and walk around. It's not like anything I've witnessed here. And so we're walking down the sidewalk, and we walk by a bunch of people that are just like standing like in line to get into this house. So I was like, what are they doing? And he's like, oh, that's Anne Frank's house. And I was like, wait, what? Stop. Can we stop for a minute? Just stop. And like, he lived around the corner from Anne Frank's house, and it's no big deal to him, which I can imagine. Maybe it's kind of like that for us being near New York City, that we don't appreciate it and think of it the way the rest of the world does. So when you're there, it's probably the same thing. But I'm like, can we just stop a minute? Like, I've read about this and stories about this, and it's in our textbooks, and like, I'm standing here, like, I'm on the sidewalk, like where the SS came, and it's just like the hair on my arms stood up. And it was kind of another moment where it was the first time I really appreciated social studies in history. When you're in school and you read it from books, And I had a really awesome social studies teacher in high school, Mr. Sassy, who comes back later in my life anyway in real estate. But he was such a good storyteller. And the way he taught his classes and taught his lessons was we took notes, but he would tell the story. It would be like bullet point. And it was, I did the work and he was a good storyteller. But in school, it always just seemed like textbook information, like whatever. I'm going to learn this because it's what I need to know to pass the grade, to pass the test, so I can go on to do something else. And standing there made the world feel so small. And that within a 7 hour flight, I was at the point, the exact point where this thing I heard about my whole life happened. So I started like looking around as we were walking and we kept going through the city, but it really made me look at the buildings and pay attention to like the little things that are so different and appreciate just a different culture and a different country, different environment. It made me like weird and emotional.
Yeah, it's interesting. It definitely, when you are at a place like that, a historic site, and it's one thing to read about something and to be taught about something, but when you actually go to a location and you recognize the reality of it, you recognize the reality of the situation, it's a totally different thing. And I agree with you. It like resonates on a very weird level. You kind of you see where it was in history, but then it also kind of in a way shows you where you are in your own point in history too. You can kind of compare and you can kind of see yourself in that moment because you're at that site. I had in Massachusetts a few years back, I went to I'm a really big fan of Henry David Thoreau, a writer, transcendentalist. He wrote book Walden, but I went there and I remember he lived in the woods or whatever. He had this little shack out there. And I remember going into the woods and seeing they had a reproduction of this guy's house out there. And reading the book, it's powerful in that setting. And that experience is actually reading his words and getting to know the guy through the book itself. But then when
Mhm.
you go in to the location, the actual place that he lived, and you get to like walk in his footsteps, it
Yeah.
really resonates with you on I totally agree on like a very weird level. And it is like an moment too there. So yeah, no, I totally feel that. So you're in Europe and you're seeing all these things, you're seeing the world, you're seeing all these new cultures. Did you kind of have like a culture shock at all? I hear that when people go to different locations far away, experience new cultures, it kind of sometimes it's like, whoa, like it's, it affects
Yeah.
you greatly.
No, definitely. I mean, there were several times, and because this was before the euro, and we played in 13 different countries, so we were all over, and there was no standard currency. So everywhere we went, they either took American money, but you get changed back in their currency, so you lose money, or you go and find a place where you can change currency, which there's always fees for that, or we're only going to be here for a day, so let's not spend anything and we just have to figure out how to eat. And like that happened a lot. It was interesting. Like we didn't obviously we got there that day. We didn't play the first night, but we had to play in Holland. Was our first show was there, and I remember the first night we had to play, and like, we got the equipment. I had a drum set. It all had cases, but we got it and packed it in the van. Like I never took it apart. I never set it up. We were in the guy's apartment. Like it didn't happen. The first time I got to see the drum set I was playing for this whole tour was at that first show when I unpacked it and like, okay, what do we got here? And I I figured it out. It wasn't my set and I made it work. Um but it was That first night was pretty good. I was kind of amazed at how many people knew our music already, and we were for the whole tour pretty much we were the headliner. We headlined not every show, but most of them. We were the headlining band because New York hardcore is very cool in Europe. So if they advertise New York hardcore, everyone's going to come. So, did we pretend that New York meant New York City? We probably did. At first, we'd fight it, but apparently the rest of the world thinks New York is just a city. They don't realize that there's cows and farms, and so you say New York, and everybody just immediately thinks of Manhattan. So no matter where you are in the world, if you say New York, they're thinking of Manhattan. And for a while, you say to people, "Oh no, not we're not actually from the city. We're kind of upstate a little bit more. We're like an hour and a half away." Nor did they care that we even said that. That trying to explain this to somebody that doesn't speak English was just pointless. So within a couple days, we're like, yeah, New York. We're from New York. Yay, New York. Um,
Big
and
Apple Yankees.
it didn't matter anymore. So, I mean, there were a couple shows that really stood out. Like we played in England and three different cities. We played in London, Leeds, and I don't remember the third one. But I remember the Leeds show. I mean, wow, I remember a bunch of these, but the show in Leeds, which is northern England, we actually played on Halloween. And I honestly I didn't even know if Halloween was a thing, if they celebrated it there or not. Sure enough, it was in Leeds because we played a show. It was like on the floor in like a carpeted room of like a daycare center. I don't even know where we were. It was just this relatively big room, not even huge, but it was all carpeted and we played on the floor, which is fine. That's very typical. Like a metal band wouldn't play on a floor. Like you need a stage or it's no deal. Hardcore, like we could set up in the middle of the room and everybody could be around us, within us, and that's just acceptable. Um, but I remember there was a guy there that was it was like a toga party, wearing a toga, and he had a leaf on his crotch. There were actually a few of them. They planned this. They came together, and they came to a hardcore show with a leaf and a toga, and they're like dancing and moshing. It was terrifying, but there were a bunch of people in costume for Halloween, and I'm like, all right, cool, Halloween show. But I mean, that was a fun night. We played in London at this uh, kind of a bigger venue that was well known for live music, and they definitely had a stage. And I remember that night, it was the only place that I ever played at that they were serious about copyright laws, and we weren't allowed to play any covers. We could only play our own music, which we only did a couple covers anyway. But a lot of like we fooled around with a bunch of different songs. Like we did some Guns N' Roses, and there was like a hardcore band or a hardcore song that we covered from a band called 108. But we kind of got nervous, so we're like, let's just cut all that out, and we're just gonna play our songs, which was fine. It was still a good night. Um, but I remember it was more like a chance type of place. Like it was a high stage and a low floor, and it was really made for these concerts, and it put us so far away from the people that the energy like wasn't there. Like in Leeds when like somebody fell on my cymbal stand and knocked it over. Like that's more fun to me than being up on a stage 20 feet away from the people listening. Um, but so we actually started in London and we played up to Leeds, and our next so the plan was we had one day off, and we had to drive from Leeds, northern England, to Paris, which is taking a ferry. So you pretty much have to drive all the way down to London, take an hour and a half ferry ride, and then drive to Paris from there. The ferry, it goes to France, but that whole trip, I want to say, was like 12 hours to do. So we had to do that and get to Paris where we were supposed to meet up with somebody. This is before cell phones. So there's no GPS, no cell phones. Like we have a map. We're in Europe with, and it's funny, our driver, we actually had a couple different drivers throughout the tour. Um, but he was from Belgium, which they speak French. And his name was Jerome. And so he spoke French. We obviously spoke English. That's all we had to go by. And as long as we were England, we were good. And when we got to France, we had him to translate. But still, with no cell phone, we got to Paris late at night, probably almost midnight. We find a payphone. We're calling the guy, or Jerome's calling, and there's no answer. So we're supposed to sleep at this guy's house. And nothing. And I remember being on the sidewalk, like all this hoodlums and hoodies and Converse and ripped jeans. And it's like midnight in Paris. And we're on the sidewalk at a payphone, stretching our legs out because we just drove 13 hours. And I remember people walking down the sidewalk crossed. It was like probably 4 lanes, like 2 lanes each direction, crossed 4 lanes of traffic to go past us and then cross back over once they got around us. And I remember seeing that and be like, really? Like, are we that scary? I didn't know how intimidating we looked, but apparently it was too much for them. So we ended up never getting a hold of the guy. We slept in the van that night. And the next day we had a 14-hour ride to Madrid, Spain. So after some shitty sleep, we just decided to give up on the sleep and Paris altogether and just get on the road and get moving. So we left, never saw the Eiffel Tower. I don't know. It was nighttime. It's lit though when I see it on TV. But apparently wherever we were, we couldn't see it. And I looked wherever we were. I was looking around. I didn't see it anywhere. But so we're driving to Madrid. It's a 14-hour ride. And apparently northern Spain, like this at this point, we're like early November. And it's kind of cold. So we are headed down, and in northern Spain, it's very mountainous, and the dirt is like orange, almost like baseball dirt here. And I remember driving through the mountains and looking and just seeing like orange mounds, but now it started snowing. So we have Jerome driving. Actually, we might have switched drivers at that point because I think once we came back, I think Jerome went home and we had Pierre, who was actually in a band called Knuckle Dust from England. He took off work because we were touring and we played with them in England. So we became friends with him. And he called into work and was like, I'm not going to be in for a couple weeks. And he became our driver. And we had Pierre now. So unfortunately, he was from England and spoke English also. So we always had a little trouble with the language barrier. But no, I'm sorry. At this point, we still didn't have Jerome. Pierre joined us after we went down. Because I remember Jerome trying to speak to somebody in Spain. We have a French guy and a Spanish guy trying to talk to each other in English. And it was hilarious. But anyway, back to that trip to Madrid. I was expecting Spain to be like warm and hot. And in my mind, it's like this fantasy. It's like going to Florida. Apparently, northern Spain is not like that. So we're trekking it through the mountains in the snow, like terrified, speeding, knowing we have a time crunch. Because by the time we would get there, it was going to be around the time of the show. That like there wasn't a big cushion here because going over the mountains and the snow slowed us down. We thought we had plenty of time, but it slowed us down. So we finally get to Madrid, which is a very compact, tight city with very narrow roads. And I'm getting texts, but I remember we finally found the club, which I can't imagine. I don't know how we found these places with like before GPS and cell phones. It's just amazing. Kids these days would never understand. But we pull up to the club, and before we try to find a place to park this van, where there's no parking here, somebody got out and like made contact with the promoter to let them know we're here. And at this point, it was about 10:15, and they said you need to hurry up because there's a noise ordinance that we have to stop music at 11. So like, well, we're not we're not even parked. We can't even get our stuff in. So we have to go like around the block, and we park somewhere else, and we come back to the club. And actually it might have been a little bit later because I know we only had like 15 minutes. So it was probably like 10:45 at this point, and there's a band playing, and we walk in, and the band stops in the middle of the set, and they're like, come on, come up, you just travel all this way, come up, use our stuff, it's your turn. They stopped in the middle of their song, gave us their equipment, and we had like 15 minutes, and all these kids came out, I mean, to see, I don't know, see whatever bands were playing that night, and unfortunately us too. And we just started playing, and the place like erupted, and there were kids piling on top of each other, singing along. I mean, they didn't speak English, and they're singing every word to every song, jumping off the stage, going absolutely nuts. And I'm like, how did this happen? Like, how do these people even know us? It is because of Release Power Productions. Their distribution in Europe was much better than in America. Like, um, they were pretty well known because it's a small underground scene. Like, if you're a name in that scene, people know who you are. So Alan from Release Power Productions did a great job distributing. He got us out all over the place, and I understood finally that why we were touring Europe. Like people actually knew who we were. But that show was crazy, and we went past our time, like 11. They actually shut the power off. They turned off all the amps, and so it was just me playing drums. Like, haha, you can't turn me off. And we just kept playing the rest of the song with just drums and the whole room singing. And it was just incredible. Um, so after the set, there's lots of hugs and high fives, and with the band, they gave us all their equipment, and it was just a really positive vibe going on. It was a great night, and it was fun. I didn't understand what anyone was saying, but it was cool. It just showed the power of music.
Did
And
you did you ever experience anything like that in the States back here at home, or was that unique to Europe?
locally, yes. Being from Orange County, if we play a show here, if it was at the Chance or in Middletown or Newburgh, somewhere right here, um, there was a good chance that we'd get a reaction similar to that. I don't even think quite at that level. Maybe I'm just blowing it up in my mind because it's 20 plus years ago, but locally, yes. Once we leave our area, people know who we are, but not the reaction that we'd get here or in Madrid because we played all over Europe, and that was the best reaction we got anywhere, I believe. So to answer, yeah, locally, very similar. But the fact that we were on tour, because we were talking before about, excuse me, the like the connection with history when you're standing in a place and it gives you that kind of like weird feeling. Um, Being on tour kind of became that. The whole thing became surreal and like you were just floating in this moment. And we had like anthems. We listened to music. We listened to Metallica a lot, and it just kind of like the whole adventure. There were um, five of us in the band, and then we brought another friend along for merch and to help out. So there were six of us plus the driver was seven. We all packed all of our stuff in this van bus thing, and it was just this adventure of these six guys. Five are kind of from the same area, but or seven, sorry, seven, whatever the number was. And it became so much more than just about music. Like we were, not to sound weird, we were living together, sleeping together. We were providing safety and comfort and conversation. And because we were in countries that people didn't speak English, like we had to speak to each other. Besides just doing the work, we had to entertain each other. And if things were going bad at home, like it was kind of like that show must go on type of thing. Because everything wasn't gravy. Like some people were having relationship problems and there's nothing they could do about it from where they are. And again, no cell phones. This is like I can grab a every once in a while I'll get a calling card or I can find a payphone in a currency that I have. Like it was not easy to communicate with home. So some people were going through some shit and all we had was each other. I remember going to like Germany. We were driving through and we stopped at a gas station and um like we had German money and we just got like some snacks, some drinks and candy bars, whatever, and got back in the van after we got some gas and we started pulling out of the gas station and we got pulled over by police right in the gas station parking lot. And this guy came up to the door, the cop, and he starts speaking in German. And like, I'm sorry, we're from America, we speak English. And I remember him yelling, who was driving at the time? But he was yelling at whoever was driving, like, no, you speak German. You're in Germany, you speak German. And he's like, I don't speak German. I'm from America. I only speak English. And this guy, like, he got mad. And like I was terrified. I'm like, oh shit, like this is going down. We're gonna end up in a German prison. I'm like, did anybody steal a candy bar? Like, are we good here? And I don't even remember how he got out of it. Eventually, he like backed off and saw that everything was fine. But I guess we stood out as a bunch of hardcore kids at a German gas station. But no, I remember being like freaked out when this guy just started yelling in German, demanding that we speak German. I'm like, that's not going to happen, dude. We're going to have a problem. But I mean, I don't want to bore you. There's just so many stories, and every different country we went to, there's culturally just different things we witnessed in in Slovenia. I remember this was a big parking lot, and we pulled in. We're supposed to be staying in this hotel, which we didn't stay in many hotels. Usually, it's just whoever. Like we play it literally during our set at the night. We would say, "Is there any place for us to stay tonight? Has anybody got some space? We'll sleep on a floor. It doesn't matter." And again, this hardcore scene is cool because So many people offered, like, yeah, come on to my mom's house. She'll make you breakfast. Like, just some strangers from New York, you're just bringing into your house. But so we're supposed to stay in this hotel. So we park the car in the parking lot. We're walking in, and on the side of the building, there's this kid sitting on a piece of cardboard with a little bucket, and he's crying and pleading, like shaking the bucket, and it was disturbing. Like I felt horrible, and I'm just seeing like how poor the country is or the people. And I mean, yes, we have homelessness in New York, even up here, not just in the city, but it wasn't something I was used to. And to see this kid like crying and begging for change, and I went to like look for whatever money we had, if we had anything in their currency, which I don't think we did anyway. But the guy that was leading us to the hotel, the promoter or whoever it was like, never mind that, don't give him anything. And I'm like, damn, you're cold. Um, so we kind of walk past and we get into the hotel, and I had to go. I left something in the van. And I had to go get it. So two of us went back out to the van. Again, we kind of like stayed in twos because just crazy shit out there. I remember going to the van, and while we're out in the parking lot the second time, I see that kid stop crying, get up, grab his piece of cardboard, and walk around the building where he met two adults, and he poured the change out and gave it to them, and then came back, sat in the same spot, and started crying and begging again. And I'm like, holy shit. It's just different. I see what he was talking about. And it's just culturally such a different world. Like every place is so different. And it was awesome to see the different places. Not necessarily see that, but to experience another world was just eye opening.
So you're in Europe and you got six, seven guys. You're in this van bus driving across the country there. Uh, I mean, that must like bind you guys for life. You must be like brothers, right? Are you still in touch with everyone?
um,
I had
it's funny. For a month and a half, we were literally inseparable. Um, and when we came home, uh, oddly enough, we did play a couple shows here and there, but everybody kind of went their separate ways, and it was very odd, and it was kind of hard for me to accept getting back. Like going on tour, I kind of thought was kicking off something new, and by the time it was done, it was like the closure of finishing off what we had done, and it was very it was odd. It was a little, I don't want to say disturbing, but it was sad. It was a little depressing. But before we get to the depressing part, I have one more story in Europe, and it was our last night. So we flew into Holland and Amsterdam. We kind of did a loop around all of Europe and ended up back at Amsterdam again. So we get there like evening time, and our flight is like 4 o'clock in the morning, or we had to leave at like 4 o'clock to be there for the flight. Um, and we're all kind of exhausted, but so energized for just being there. So we met up. We were staying at the same spot that we stayed the first time with a guy that we got there, and he was going to get us back to the airport. And he's like, "You guys must be exhausted. You want to just go to sleep?" And again, we're like, "Hell no! Like this is our last night in Europe, and we got to go do something." And it was raining. It was really a shitty night. It was cold, and he's like, "Well, I don't know what you want to do." He's like, "I have an idea." He's like, "My friend is the manager of a movie theater, um, and let me call him up and we can go see a movie." I'm like, "All right." It's raining. Like, I don't really want to stand on the sidewalk, but that's cool. And he called him up, and we went, and it was weird. It wasn't like a movie theater here. It was like underground. It was kind of weird. Like we were walking through a building, the lights were dark, and passing through another building, and we ended up finally at a movie theater. And I guess he ran the movie theater, so he just had keys and had everything he needed to play a movie. Um, and we watched Fight Club. That was the first time I ever saw it, and I remember it was after midnight, probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and we're in some theater deep in the depths of some building in Amsterdam, in the middle of the night, watching Fight Club. And it was just another experience of something that I'd remember forever and would never happen again. Uh, so that was like our big going out bash. Our last night in Europe, we watched Fight Club. It was almost like I don't know, maybe it was an abandoned mall or a strip mall or some sort of commercial building, but we were going through like I don't know the guts of it, like the back hallways where the delivery people would walk, not and it I was completely lost. Um, and if I had seen the movie Taken before I went, things might have been different. But yeah, I definitely have seen a few movies that probably would have changed some of the things I did while I was there. You ever see Hostel?
Yes, yes, I love that movie. Yeah,
Creepy
crazy
as hell.
movie. Oh yeah, crazy movie, but it's a good one
Yeah,
though.
and like I was in Prague, in Croatia, in Slovenia, in Hungary. Hungary, that's kind of a cool story too. But I know it's getting really long. I don't want to keep boring you with stories, but
You're not boring. It's totally cool. Yeah.
my okay, so my guitar player Mike, his parents are Hungarian, and he grew up speaking Hungarian and English. So he he could speak fluent Hungarian. So when we went to Budapest, Hungary, which is such a cool place by itself, like we went, there was a castle, there was a guy playing a violin. So the castle, like one of the old school ones where there's an outer wall and it was a walkable wall. So you can walk the wall and there's a guy playing violin like up on the wall. And it was just cool. Like, yeah, we're a hardcore metal band, but like any music is just relatable. And it was cool just to see like street musicians playing in the castle. And it's up on this hill, and Budapest apparently is split by a river. And one side is Buda and the other side is Pest. Is kind of the way it was explained to me. I don't know if that's absolutely true, but it sounded good. But so we played at this place that was like an underground club that felt like it was in a dungeon. Like concrete walls, but not, they weren't straight. They were kind of like rounded and painted black. It was like being in this like weird cave thing. Um, and and it was a bunch of like small rooms, like you could get lost. It was weird, and there were people all over. And I remember we were talking to people, and again, like broken English, it is a universal language, and some people speak it better than others in other countries, but we had no choice because we didn't speak anything else. So we're trying to have conversations with people, and Mike came by, and I remember saying, "Oh, Mike, come here," and telling them our guitar player is Hungarian. He can speak Hungarian. So they start like asking him questions, and he's like, "No, no, no. I'm American. I speak English." And we're like, "Why are you doing that?" Like, we're in one country finally that you can communicate, and you don't want to. And he kept like turning them down. Every time they tried to talk to him, he'd respond in English and tell them, "No, I'm not Hungarian. I'm American. I speak English." And they started to get mad. And I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, dude, you're gonna get us beat up in this friggin' dungeon in Budapest? Like, and he finally did speak a little bit to like satisfy them, but explain to them that he's not comfortable speaking that language because he's not too familiar with it. Like he speaks it at home, but the dialect is different. Like he's not from the old country. He's from Orange County, New York. So it made more sense to me then that he just didn't feel comfortable speaking it because he thought people would make fun of his accent or whatever. Um, so I get it, but it was another time that I was a little scared, but we made it through. We were all right. I mean, we had snowball fights in Austria, like in the mountains. Like there was a little gas station, not even a gas station, a little convenience store. I remember it had like sliding doors that were automatic. Um, Roger, my other guitar player, tried to walk through one, but he went to the wrong side. So when it opened, he walked into the glass. I remember the guy yelled at him for that. And he was like, sorry, I wasn't being a jerk. I just, he misjudged which side opened and walked into the other side. So we came back out and ended up having a snowball fight. And that was another cool thing. Like up in the mountains of Austria. Like, how cool is that?
No, that's why it's a wild experience. I mean, the whole story. I mean, there's so much to touch on there, but like so you guys like you come back home after this crazy journey throughout Europe. I mean, you've seen all these different things. You ended up in the theater there. You were out there in Hungary. You had all these different experiences. You're out in Spain doing that concert where it's just you. They shut everything off. You get back home and you land. You're here. Everyone kind of separates. Did you have a feeling of what now when that happened? Like you said, it kind of everything came to an end. You thought like things, you thought you were just at the beginning, but when did you come to a realization like, okay, this is kind of going in a direction I didn't expect it to go? And then like what happened after that?
Um, well, I remember even just the drive home from the airport, and it was like the beginning of December, like December 7th or something like that. And it was just like an overcast day. And I remember driving on 84 because I lived in Maybrook. So I remember driving and everything just looked gray and it was depressing. And I had this feeling like I don't want to be back. Like I want to go back there. Like that adventure was so much fun and eye opening and exciting. And now like I'm on 84. Like this is lame. What do I do now? And I had so before I went, like I said, I had just graduated high school. So of course my grandmother wanted me to go to college. And I had to tell her like I'm not going to college, I'm going to tour Europe with a metal band. And it didn't go so well, but she didn't really have much say in it. But she wasn't happy. She wanted me to go to college and my parents were definitely understanding and they supported my decision. But part of the plan was when I got back, I was going to college in the spring. So I was accepted to a few colleges to go away to, but it kind of didn't work out that I would go away mid semester or mid year for like the spring semester. So if I didn't go in September, when I came back, I was just going to OC and I was going to stay local, which is exactly how it worked out. I came back, I started going to college, but our bass player, Ryan, call him Smith, but Ryan Smith, um, he was going to college and that was his plan. Uh, Mike kind of just went off to do his own thing. He went to work. He focused on other things. A couple of the guys, like I said, were having relationship issues while we were there, so they had mentally other stuff when we got back to go deal with, and they weren't focused on the band. Everybody had their own thing to do. I mean, I went to Ock, so it was just like being in high school anyway. I drove down the road and I came back home again. But so I was ready to keep going, but everybody wasn't there. And we we got together and like played some shows locally here and there. But I remember just getting into just playing on my own in my basement, jamming. And I got a phone call one day from a local promoter who I knew from Interdam and playing all the shows. And he said, Chris, there's this band, Shai Halud, that is looking for a drummer. And I told him to give you a call because I think it'd be perfect for you. And it's pretty complicated stuff and not anybody could do it. And I gave him your name because I know Interdam kind of slowed down and you guys didn't know what you were doing. I'm like, yeah, I know Shai Halud. Aren't they from like South Florida? He's like, yeah, but they just moved to Poughkeepsie. I'm like, really? So he's like, yeah, they actually moved up here because they needed a drummer and they found a guy and they wanted to get out of South Florida because it was like a 9 hour drive just to get out of Florida from there. So in South Florida, like you're contained in this one little area. And Shai Hulud was actually a lot bigger than Interdam was. They were on tour in Europe, coincidentally, like a month before us. Because everywhere we went, I saw Shai Hulud posters from the show that were still up from when they played. So we like followed them around Europe. So it was kind of funny. So I told Juan, I'm like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll give them a call. They said they came up because they found a drummer here. So it was between that and the opportunity to get out of South Florida. This is a great area because you can get to the city, you can go up to Connecticut, Jersey. You can get anywhere from here much easier than South Florida. So they wanted a whole location change. It ended up not working out with the other drummer. So that's why they were kind of on the spot. They moved up here, they have shows booked, and now they have no drummer again. So I was like the backup plan. So I went and tried out with them. I didn't know their music. I didn't listen to them regularly. I've heard them before, and I knew that they were uh, kind of progressive and choppy and on time. It like combined the two different musics that I did. And I remember we got together and I didn't know their music. So we just played Metallica songs. And it was cool. But we got a good feel for each other and for playing. And they were like, we want you. Can you learn these songs? We have shows booked. We're gonna play a lot. But really we need like 8 songs. And it was like Interdam all over again in the beginning. As long as we could play a show, that's what we need. We'll work on other songs after that, but let's get 7 down. They told me what songs to learn, and luckily they're bigger. They have CDs and albums of all of their stuff, so I was able to go home and learn the songs. Like it just, I went to work. It was like a job. I had to learn these songs. Also, while I was in Europe, my mother sold her house and moved, which was kind of a weird thing. I came home to not my house. So that was kind of weird. My parents got divorced right when I graduated high school. So that was kind of going on too. So they got divorced when I graduated high school. My mother put the house on the market and they sold the house that I grew up in, and that closed. And she bought another house in that month and a half while I was gone. So I left one house and I came back to another house that wasn't mine. I lost a lot of toys in that deal. That still upsets me. Transformers and GI Joe and He Man.
All the good stuff.
But yeah, that's all right. Um, so I learned songs to play, and Shai Hulud also. So they were renting a house in like the town of Poughkeepsie, like Wappingers Falls area, right off of Bassett Road, and they had their own rehearsal space set up there. So I learned the songs on my own, and then went to rehearse. And once I went to Poughkeepsie, it was like I stayed there. I didn't have my own room, but I slept on the couch a lot. We'd wake up, we'd play music, we'd eat, we'd play more music, we'd go to sleep. And it was like I had so much peanut butter and jelly because I had no job, and like that's all I could afford to eat. So, but it was so much fun. And those guys were great. It was cool just meeting a whole bunch of different people. Their singer was actually that tour that they did in Europe before us. They went without a singer because their singer didn't, he was in another band and he didn't want to fly. So they had this European tour, and at the last minute, he was like, guys, I'm not doing it. I'm not going. So they had two guitar players in the band, and they were just going to go. And one of the guitar players would sing if they had to. And that's how they started doing the show. And they met this one kid that came up and sang with them at a show early on in the tour. And they asked him if he would do the rest of the tour. So this kid, say kid, he was actually the same age as me. So he probably just graduated high school too. And he took off from whatever plans he had. And Shai Hulud was his favorite band. That's how he knew all the lyrics to every song. He did the whole tour and then moved to the United States. And he joined Shai Hulud from Europe. And his name's Geert Vandervelde. But I mean, the band was made up of people from all over. The bass player and guitar player from Norman, Oklahoma. And it was their favorite band. And they drove from Oklahoma to South Florida to try out for Shai Hulud. And they got in the band. And then they moved to Poughkeepsie. I mean, these people, they're so committed. And I was so impressed because it was, I won't say it was more professional than Interdam, but it definitely was. Interdam was a bunch of friends that lived locally in Orange County, and we played and we played shows. And Shai Hulud just seemed so much more structured and driven. They also had a record label that was bigger than the label we were on, and it was in America. And I don't know, it seemed a little bit more focused. And we started playing shows, and because they were a lot bigger than Interdam, their shows were always crazy. Their fans are like diehard, and it was so cool to be part of that. I mean, for a while, I felt like I was in a cover band because I was playing these songs that I just learned to play this show, and it took a while for me to like feel like I belonged. And eventually it ended because a lot of that we never had an issue, but I never felt like it was my band. Like we started writing music and we had different writing styles, and um it was like, not that I couldn't do it, but to do it, I was just playing what somebody else wanted me to play, and it wasn't me. So I really tried. I wanted to. I liked being kind of famous because Shai Hulud was like that. Like people know who you are, and I liked that. As a 20-year-old kid, it was cool. I went to, and again, we actually went on tour with One King Down, and we played with them. We played these bigger festivals that I never did with Interdam. We played Furnace Fest, which is in Birmingham, Alabama. It was like an old furnace that was abandoned. It's more of a like a touristy place, but every year they do this big festival there. It's a big music fest. It's 3 days long, and Shai Hulud's actually playing this year again with Gear, who hasn't sang for them in a while. So he's kind of like back for this show. But um, I I played Hellfest, which was it still goes on, the Hellfest. Back then it was a little smaller, and there was a whole DVD made that was all of these bands with interviews, and it was put out by the record label. And it's like on YouTube. You can go find Hellfest videos of Shai Hulud in 2000, and I'm that drummer over there playing. But it was that was the band for about 2 years, and in that time, I met my wife. I realized how poor I was, and I wasn't in high school anymore. And like all this stuff started like piling on. Like I need to make some money. I need to live. I'm falling in love with this girl, and I have nothing to offer. Like life was just moving, and I felt like I was still there. As cool as it was to be in Shai Hulud, I wasn't completely satisfied with every other part of my life, and it didn't all fit. So eventually I said, listen, I can't do it anymore. I'll play as long as you need. Like I'm not going to make you miss shows. I'll play, but you're gonna have to find another drummer. And it was mutual. There was mutual respect all the way around. I'm still friends with those guys. I hung out with the singer every New Year's Eve. He comes up and spends the night with a friend up here. He lives in like South Jersey now. And this year he came up and we went out to dinner and we hung out. We went to Rock Fantasy. We played pinball, and it was cool. Like I spent a lot of time with this guy 20 years ago, and Matt is still somebody that I respect a lot musically and personally. We used to get into arguments over which of us was a nicer person. Like, who does that? Like, oh, you're such a nice guy. Well, you're nicer than I am. Well, no, you're the nicest person in the band. And it was how weird. And then we get on stage and we're screaming and bashing things, and people are just punching each other in the face and going nuts. And we're like, oh, I'm really sorry about that. Like it was my fault. I'm sorry. He's just such a sweet guy, and you don't expect the music that he puts out. He's such a good songwriter and like a great guitar player. And again, he's not technical, but not on purpose, I'll say. He is, but he just naturally figures out chords and notes that go together, and he builds music by ear. He has no idea what the chord is called that he's playing, but he knows when his fingers go here, this is the sound he's looking for. And he writes some amazing stuff. And it was just more of that, like really realizing that you don't need, and I'm not putting down people that practice and have technical skills, because I wish I still did. Um, but sometimes that's not all you need. But yeah, Shai Hulud ended a few years later, and well, Shai Hulud didn't leave. Me and Shai Hulud left, and I got a job at Volkswagen Mazda in Middletown as a salesperson because I didn't know what to do. Actually, sorry, and that is my next job. But first, I worked at American Eagle in the mall in Middletown, which is where I met my wife. But I started. I was still in Shai Hulud at the time, and I was feeling the pressure of not having money. And I was like, I need to go get a job. And even though I spend most of my time in Poughkeepsie, Middletown is like my town. Even though I was in Maybrook, like if I went to a mall, that's where I was going. I never even considered getting a job in Poughkeepsie or even Newburgh to save on the trip. So I was driving from Poughkeepsie to Middletown to work at American Eagle. And I remember going in for an interview, and the manager was this girl that was short, and I said, I don't want to be a problem for scheduling, but I'm a drummer in a band and I gotta play some shows sometimes. So is it a problem if I have to take days off? And she's like, oh, well, what kind of music? My boyfriend's in a band. I was like hardcore metal stuff. You never know how to like approach that when people are asking. Like they might be into Christina Aguilera, um, who I love, by the way. Uh, but she was like, "What band are you in?" I said, "Shai Hulud." She's like, "Really? You're in Shai Hulud?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "Got to make some money." She's like, "Yeah, no, I completely understand. Yeah, it's no problem. Anytime you need, just let me know. We'll take you off the schedule." I was like, "Cool." I'm like, so Shai Hulud kind of got me a job and got me a job that I could take off anytime I want. But that was the first time like dropping the name got me anywhere. But so my now wife, it was like my first week of work, and she walked in and she's talking to her friends, like the other people I work with, and she's like, "Who's this guy?" And I'm like, "Who's this guy? Like, who are you?" And it started like this weird kind of tension. They're like, "Oh, that's Chris. He's the new guy." So I went about my business, and then I got off work and I'm walking through the mall and I see her in Select Comfort, just like the airbed store. And I'm like, oh, she works there. And it just started like that. And I'd stop in and I'd jump on the beds and I'd annoy her at work, and then she'd come in and annoy me at work. And it just kind of built from there. And that's how we all started.
That's that's awesome. I mean, hey, hey, I mean that job alone, I mean that's pretty cool that you were able to kind of just take off like whenever and you're able to kind of name drop the band and in that situation. I mean, that worked out really well. And it's all, I mean, it worked out really well that you were able to meet your wife too there at the mall. And yeah, that's a good situation. But so at this time you're still in the band and you're driving back and forth to Middletown, Poughkeepsie. Uh, so when did you ultimately decide that, okay, I can't keep on doing this with the band anymore? When did you decide to kind of call it quits there? And why did you do that? To like what was the reason for that?
Okay. I mean, it's the moment in time is pretty defining. We were playing shows and we had 10 or so songs that we played, changing out, but we had our set that we played all the time, and it was time to write a new album. And we had worked on songs, or we even wrote some songs that we were playing before they were even recorded. But we had to have like a 10-song album to put out, and this was a contract with the record label. So there was pressure behind it because you have to do this for the record label and contract. Um, and I wasn't used to writing that way. Like we would, if we came up with something, we'd have a new song, and that's the way it was. I never had to like have to write 10 songs because somebody's waiting for them. Was a lot of pressure combined with this isn't my style. And although I learned the songs, when it came to creating new songs, it wasn't what I was completely comfortable with. Um, Combined with all of the other stuff going on in my life, I just decided like instead of stressing out over this, that I'm just gonna step back and let somebody else do it. and I'm gonna pursue the other side of my life. So, I mean, that's pretty much all it was. It was a matter of having to write an album, and it came to writing new songs, and it wasn't working.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And uh, did you join another band at the time, or did you decide, okay, now I need to make a change and pursue like kind of a typical job situation? And what was the impetus for that? Was that the relationship that you were building with your now wife, or what caused you to want to make that change? Because for the past several years, you're telling me you went on tour in Europe, you were with Shai Hulud as well. And so, I mean, now you're stepping back from professional music. Yeah. So like what did you end up doing at that point, and why? What was the catalyst?
Um, Honestly, it was kind of like I almost wanted to be a grown up. At this point, I was 21, 22. I had started college. I dropped out of college because when I joined Shai Hulud, I literally just stopped going to school. Like I only did school until it was time to play. And then, hi dog. And then I just wanted to figure out how to get a job and earn money and be a responsible part of society. You two are obnoxious. See the camera shaking is because my dog's tail is banging into it. But yeah, I kind of jumped around. I didn't have a degree, so I did a couple different jobs. I did some construction. Like I said, I did that other construction before, so I had somewhat construction background. I did some roofing, American Eagle. Wasn't a full-time job, so it was all part-time, and I wasn't making life kind of money there. Wasn't really career. So that I ran into a friend eventually that, well, besides selling cars, when I ran into Mike and he was like, "Oh, I also, yeah, I don't know, a bunch of different ones. Which one happened first?" So I worked at Alto Music in Middletown also, and I did that. Actually, it was 9/11 was my second day at work, and I'd always wanted a job at a music store, and now I had this musical experience, and I felt kind of like rock starry, like I deserve this job as a professional musician because that's what I am. Um, I worked there for about 2 years. That ended because they thought I was stealing, and that a drum got damaged, and they blamed me for it. But whatever, that's just the way it is. That's when I ran into Mike, and he was like, "Well, come sell cars with me at Middletown Mazda Volkswagen." So I sold cars for like 9 months, and that's where I met your father, and I found that that wasn't for me. I didn't want to sell cars. I don't know. So I just kept jumping around, and I ran into a friend that I actually knew when I lived in Wallkill when I was like 2 years old. And I ran into her at the Newburgh Mall, which I never went to. And this one day I ran into her, and she's like, "I'm working at Pius 12. It's a non-secure detention in Middletown, and they're hiring." So I went and applied, and I got the job, and I started this whole new career of something I never did before. And it was working with at-risk youth at a non-secure detention, which was really fulfilling. Like I felt like I was doing something and helping someone. And I realized that that's something I needed. that I didn't get from selling cars or doing construction, and I just didn't get that self-fulfillment that I was getting from working with kids. And from that job, I applied for a state position at Goshen Secure Center, but they were having a hiring freeze and I couldn't get in there. I got married while I was working at Pius 12 and bought a house. Like all like the real life stuff was happening, and none of it had anything to do with music. But my wife got pregnant with her first son, and I needed to make, well, first I needed to make more money before she was pregnant. So I left that to do construction again. I'm like, well, I'll suck it up and I'll do construction and get paid more. So I switched to that and I left the health benefits, and then my wife got pregnant and I was like, oh, I need to go back. I need a job that has health insurance again. But I jumped around. I worked in a warehouse, and then I got the job at Goshen Secure Center. They finally called me back and they did interviews, and it was a state job. Like my father worked for the state, my mother worked for the state in different capacities, but I finally was like, oh, cool. Now, like I'm a real adult. Like I have a state job. I'm gonna get a pension. I have health insurance. There's retirement. There's deferred compensation, overtime. I'm like, this is real money. Like this is it. I'm done. I did it. I'm set. But it was many years of that. I was there for 17 years and many children. And I actually, musically, I got into a cover band and started a band with a friend of mine named Brian, who I knew back when I was a kid playing Dream Theater stuff. And he was into Dave Matthews. And I saw him at an open mic night one night that he played regularly in like Goshen. And I started going out to see him. And he's like, oh, why don't you have bongos? Why don't you bring bongos one night? We'll add bongos in. So I started playing bongos. And then our other friend came over. He played saxophone, a kid that I went to school with, and we played in high school band together. So it was bongos, acoustic guitar, and a saxophone. And we're doing like Dave Matthews covers. And these bars are like going crazy over it. And this is like early 2000s when Dave Matthews was huge, and like the college age people, like everybody loved that stuff. And somebody asked us to play a wedding. We're like, really? So we got a bass player and started playing and became a band that played a lot. We did that one wedding and that was it. But that was my musical thing for many years, was this cover band, which we did all the classic rock and stuff that I loved growing up, and a lot of Dave Matthews and more modern acoustic stuff. And it was a whole new kind of music for me and a whole new love. So it rounded off my playing and being powerful and metal, and then into like this groovy Dave Matthews stuff. And it just was what I did for a long time. And then eventually, because of work problems, things didn't work out with that band because there was too much overtime and I couldn't make shows anymore and other conflicts. But
so you got married, you had kids, you ended up getting a pretty stable job. Were these things that you always saw yourself wanting one day, or did you aspire to, when you were growing up, did you aspire to continue your music career? Or did you want to eventually have a stable family situation? What ultimately did you want? And when you did end up getting married and you had kids, you got the job, was that something that satisfied you, or like was that something like, did you still have like that desire to play music? I know you said you were in that Dave Matthews cover band as well. So obviously you're playing music on the side, but did you always see yourself as eventually settling down and having a family?
I honestly, I always wanted kids. That was always something I wanted. I never knew exactly how it was going to happen. So I say the timeline was never planned, but I I always saw that sometime. There was never a job that I wanted to do to be my career. I mean, yes, I always wanted to play drums. I didn't really know how that translated to money because in all my experience, I did it for fun, not for money, and I didn't get rich doing it. So I don't know how that was going to happen. But I always saw I always saw myself having kids, and my wife also wanted kids. She wanted a big family, and I was thinking like two. She was thinking like five. So we compromised with five. Um, but I never had a career that I really wanted. I was never passionate to have a job. So I kind of ended up in a field that I liked because I got some fulfillment working with these at-risk youth that it's definitely challenging. These are um, a lot of them were convicted criminals or violent felons before the age of 16. And now they're put in a prison, taken away from their friends and family, and they have me. And I learned a lot. Um, Culturally, besides like ethnical differences, culturally, as in like the city, most of our kids were from the city. And there was a whole lot of culture shock there, just in that building, um, learning how things are in the city, just just the gangs and schools and the way these kids are growing up was something I was not used to in Maybrook, New York, an hour and a half away, and it taught me a lot about as much as I've seen in Europe, and I got this very quick look at a lot of places. I spent 17 years here, and it wasn't like just visiting. It became part of me and building my character and who I am. I think it made me a lot tougher than I used to be. I was always very passive, and I avoided confrontation and conflict as much as possible through either like humor or just avoidance. Um, in that environment, avoidance didn't work. Humor did sometimes, but you're in a box with people and you're going to face them either way. And it was either sometimes residents, sometimes coworkers. And if you have no aggressive blood in your body at all, you're just going to get chewed up and spit out. It's just the environment calls for it. You have to toughen up. And, I would say that I did, um, not necessarily comfortably, but it definitely became part of who I am and changed me. And I've heard about it from my family and from my wife that I'm not the same person I was back then. Not to say it's good or bad. Sometimes it's good in life to have, sometimes you need to be a little aggressive. But before that, like, I was not at all. Like I said, we used to get arguments over who was a nicer guy. I probably wouldn't be in that same argument now. I think he'd win. But no, I'm not a bad guy. It was nice getting out, because it got to be too much. Hi, dog. It got to be a lot. The overtime in the prison system became so ridiculous that you're doing 16 to 20 hours a day in an environment that's high stress, and you have to suck it up and do it for your family, for your paycheck, for your insurance. You kind of get trapped there. And I didn't realize 17 years went by. This was supposed to be like a step for me. And I just never took another step. I just stayed there. And I realized that I was just working. I was living to work. And I was missing time with my kids growing up. And I really tried to make as many birthdays as possible, even if I had to call out or do a mutual and switch with somebody else at work, to make band concerts. And with a lot of kids, there was a lot of events going on. So it was like every week I was stressing out over if I'm going to get stuck that day, if I'm going to be able to get it. Like, do I have to call out just so I don't get stuck? And I saw that things weren't getting better, and I had to make a move. And the move I chose to make was to get my real estate license. I got my real estate license and decided to, after probably 3 years, there was so much overtime that I couldn't even do real estate, and I just quit the other job. I was miserable. I didn't want to do it. I was trapped in it. And I found another job that gave me the benefits, and I just made a jump into full-time real estate.
Gotcha.
Which was a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. So obviously you have all these steps in life. Even you had that 17-year-long step where you were working in the facility there doing corrections, and eventually you're out, you're doing real estate. What do you think the next step is? If you had 10 years from now, what do you think the next step? What kind of goals do you have set up for your life?
I want to get into real estate investing. That's really what I wanted to do from the beginning, but I didn't have the income to get into it or the knowledge. So I got my real estate license to learn the real estate world from the inside out. And I'm getting to the point where I'm learning about different ways to get money, and I don't have to necessarily have it. I can borrow it, and I'm working and studying at the same time and learning that there's other ways to do it. So long term is get into real estate investing and creating passive income, to spend even more time at home.